fossil fuels for electricity, burning fossil fuels on our appliances, burning fossil fuels in our transportation has been pouring heat trap and climate pollution into our atmosphere, causing our Earth to warm. The global average temperature has gone up on average about 1.5 degrees over the last 150 years since we started doing this, and the rate at which that temperature is rising has been going up faster and faster. So just so we remember what's at stake, I want to invite folks, and it's easy to remember on a day that is this hot. Let's just name some of what we know could happen if we don't do anything about this. If we continue to pour this heat trap and climate pollution into our atmosphere, causing our Earth to warm, and just shout them out, and I'll repeat for the people on Zoom. Yeah.
Polar ice melting.
Right, so the land-based ice at the poles would melt, raising sea level. And it's one thing to think about what that would mean here. We live on a coastal city, right? So higher sea levels affect us. But there are also people, very poor people around the world who live very close to sea level, like Bangladesh. Fires. Yeah, so wildfires. So, rain, colder temperatures, et cetera, that, the conditions for wildfires are much worse, and they can be more out of control for longer. And we had this unprecedented experience last summer of having wildfire smoke affect us here in this region, which I had never experienced in my life before. Okay, extreme weather, hurricanes is the next thing. So climate change isn't responsible for any one storm, but the way I've heard it put is it's having the oceans be so much warmer is rolling the dice against ourselves for extreme weather. It's making the likelihood of dangerous and scary storms much, more likely, and that when they happen, they are stronger and more damaging. A few other things, hang in there. Okay, so I'll put those, drought and crop failure, I'll put those two together. Even though we think of our food as coming from the supermarket, we ourselves are dependent on the places in the land to grow the food that we eat. Anyone who here is a gardener, there's the map on the back of the seed packets that says this is the right place and time to plant this thing, right? So that whole map has moved as the Northern Hemisphere has warmed, even in our lifetimes. And you can imagine there's a lot of people around the world who are subsistence farmers who basically count on being able to bring forth the food they need for their families every year from the ground. And you can imagine how terrifying it is to be like in Uganda or Malawi and be planting the seeds at the time, your grandmother taught you was the right time, and something's changed, right? The rain is coming in differently. It's no longer the conditions under which you can grow things, the things that always worked in that space, in that place. I'll just take a few more, yeah. Sorry. Famine. Loss of habitat. There was one more back here? Okay, yeah, so food scarcity, these problems with growing things in the place or the different rainfall patterns, glacier melt, not providing the same water that used to be there. You can imagine this is going to be very disruptive, right? There's people driven off the land where they used to be able to live, and that leads to migration and all the difficulties of refugees and migration and trauma. And I also heard habitat loss. So the kinds of losses we would be seeing of species that could not adapt quickly enough in a rapidly warming climate, it's hard to take into your heart. It's like we're talking about a third or half, of all the plants and animals not being able to rapidly adapt to rapid warming. There's a climate activist named Bill McKibben. He's United Methodist. I believe he's married to somebody Jewish and also spends time in temples. And he said, we are running Genesis in reverse in this generation. That we are witnessing the uncreation of species in this rapid moment, So an intense way to put it, and really emphasizes the intensity of this moment. I'll just name one more before we get off of this topic, because it's hard. There are a number of diseases around the world that are spread by mosquitoes. Zika, West Nile, malaria. In the past, cold winter temperatures controlled these mosquitoes and the diseases that they brought. Increasingly, there are places where mosquitoes are causing mosquito-borne disease at much higher rates because the cold winter temperatures no longer control them as they used to. And when I think about this, it drives home for me the violent injustice of the way that climate change is playing out around the world, where if you think about the parts of the world where malaria are the biggest problem, they are precisely the parts of the world where people did the least to cause this pollution, benefited the least from the industrialization that was built on this pollution, and now are being on the front lines and being hurt first and worst by these disease outbreaks. So Bill McKibben again, who I just mentioned, was on that radio show, that podcast On Being, and he describes walking through a hospital in Dhaka, Bangladesh during an outbreak of dengue fever, mindful that it's in part climate change that's made this outbreak so bad. And so he talks about walking around through this hospital with people in every bed shivering away. He said, the epidemiology isn't perfect, but the moral math works for me. If there's 100 beds in that hospital and we produce 25% of the world's climate pollution, then 25 of those beds are on us. Really suggesting this sense of moral responsibility for those of us in the countries that are producing the climate pollution and those around the world who are suffering from its impact. Okay, let's take a deep breath. How about another one? Okay. I sometimes forget to breathe when I'm talking about climate change. Okay. So, taking stock of this, first of all, notice how you're feeling right now, because it brings up feelings. It can be hard to talk about. And we often struggle to talk, even though so many of us care about this issue and have it on our hearts, and actually studies show 7 in 10 Americans now understand climate science and are concerned about this. So we're in very good company. But it can be hard to open these conversations. It can be hard, and if you don't open the conversation, then the people around you think you don't care either, and it's called the spiral of climate silence. So we need to practice. The very first thing we need to do to address this problem together is to practice talking about it and opening a conversation, and not talking about something scientific or technical, but talking about, why does climate change matter to you? What are the feelings or thoughts, or what's the striking image from what we just talked about that really touched you, and why do you care about this? And why, when you think about what a Jewish response, or a Reformed Jewish response, or a Temple Micah values response would look like, how do you start to think about that? So I'm going to invite everyone to turn to a neighbor and ask your neighbor, or we can call it a chavruta, right, a study partner. Ask your chavruta, why does climate change matter to you? And see what they say. If just one person has shared, I'm going to invite you to switch to the other partner now. That was fast. Usually Jews keep talking. Manorah makom hazeh. Manorah makom hazeh. Manorah makom hazeh. So thank you for opening your hearts. Thank you for talking to each other. I hope you'll hold on to some of what you shared, but also what you heard. And I want to call us back together with this, these words that Jacob in Bereshit said when he awoke from his dream. He had this dream of angels going up and down on the ladder, and that he was connected to the sky in a way he hadn't realized before. And when he awoke, he said, Manorah, how awesome. Manorah hamakom hazeh. How awesome is this place, and I didn't even know it. And that, to me, is that's the exclamation we're all making in this generation. Like, how awesome is this world that we have, and how sacred it is, the way the ecosystem and the interdependence of everything, and how much we need to acknowledge, honor, and protect that sanctity. How awesome is this community of people of faith all over this region who are asking together, what do we do about this? And having the same kinds of heartfelt conversations that you did just now. That's a really awesome interfaith climate movement that's emerging. But also how awesome in the biblical, awe-inspiring it is to be in this generation and alive on earth in this moment, when we're the first generation to be experiencing the climate crisis and the last generation that will be able to do anything about it. That is an awesome responsibility, but also an incredible, it's an incredible thing to be alive in this time and to have this before us. Just know, I cannot take away all of the hard feelings that, the bad feelings that come up, because I have them too when I think about the climate crisis. But what I can say is the kind of conversation in this room that you just heard, that buzz as people shared, is the way it goes in every congregation in this region, right? I've been talking to congregations nearly every weekend for 15 years, and people of all faith traditions all over this neighborhood even. I've had so many of these heartfelt conversations where folks are asking themselves, what are we called to do in this moment? What would living out our values with integrity and compassion look like right now? So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of what that looks like. I have a sign-up sheet here, and at the end, I don't want you to be scribbling down anything. We have some flyers and things, but please just if there's something that you want to hear about, I'll plan to send an email to anyone who signs up here. I'll send an email with all the resources that I mentioned. So just listen and think if there's anything that catches your eye, catches your ear, you want to do. My invitation would just listen for one thing that we mentioned that we're working on that you think, oh, I could do that, or I could bring it to my to my neighborhood, I could bring it to my community, or it's something that we could do here at Temple Minka. So when we talk to faith communities about responding to the climate crisis, what does that mean? We think of it as having 3 components. And we summarize them as learn, go green, and speak out. So do something like this event, something where we talk, open climate conversations about why we care about this and what we feel called to do about it. Going green, taking action to build, a green team like the climate action team here, climate action group, I was told, climate action group here, and then commit to finding ways to tangibly green our practices in our faith communities as well as in our homes. And ultimately speak out. So we're trying to raise our voices as faith voices for stronger climate policy. And we'll talk about each of those sections, those areas. So in learning, I want to, certainly this kind of program is something we do lots, and I'm happy to connect with additional resources for some of the thought leadership on Jewish climate action and Jewish climate Torah that are out there. But I wanted to share in particular some of the hands-on learning experiences we're doing with congregations, including a number of synagogues, around the impact, documenting the impact of burning gas. So we sort of see the front line of the climate fight right now as the burning of methane gas in our buildings, what some of you may call natural gas, but we're not going to use that word anymore. So burning gas in our buildings raises a number of concerns about climate. Because methane itself is what they call a climate superpolluter. It traps something like 80 times as much heat as carbon dioxide. So even if it burns a little cleaner than coal, for example, but it has to be piped through the pipes all the way to the places that it's burned. And then burning it inside our buildings means that we're breathing the air that's affected by the combustion. So we have groups of folks in congregations through not only Interfaith Power Light, but a group called Washington Interfaith Network, which is like a social justice faith network, are doing, first of all, methane leak detecting. So we have a device where you can see if methane is leaking out of pipes or underground, the utility covers in your neighborhood. A group of this did this only, sort of sampled. It was not a scientific study, but lots of congregations in the DC area over a little more than a year did these walks around their neighborhood testing for leaks and found hundreds of leaks, methane leaks in every ward of DC, and they did a report about every one they found. About 16 of them were maxed out the device and were potentially explosive and are actually dangerous. So the Washington Gas was called about that, but it's important to understand that gas leaks is not a noun, it's a verb. Like everywhere gas is in the ground, in these pipes, in these aging cities, it's leaking, and it's a major, even when it is dangerous from an explosive perspective, but and there was like an elementary school in DC that was closed several days in the last month or two because of that. But it's also just, there's no way to meet our climate goals if we have methane leaking all over our city. But something that's been very close to home for a lot of folks is kitchen testing. So when we burn gas in our kitchens, and this is something, I was a climate activist for over 10 years before I really focused on the fact that I was lighting fossil fuels in my kitchen every time I used my stove, right under my own nose, So we sort of have internalized that smoking indoors is not great for the people breathing in our same space, and idling a car indoors is not good. So, we sort of know that combustion indoors is not good for the air. But we sort of gotten accustomed to the idea that we all burn, a lot of us burn fossil fuels right there in our kitchens. So there's about 21 pollutants that come off of combustion of gas in stoves. But one of the most concerning is called nitrogen oxide, which is like a respiratory irritant. It accelerates the development of asthma and asthma attacks. Our EPA does not have any standard for indoor air. I learned that. Our government has no standards for indoor air, but it does have a standard for outdoor air, and it says that you shouldn't be around, it's not really healthy to be around more than 100 parts per billion of nitrogen oxide outdoors. So we've been testing people's gas-burning kitchens while their stoves are on in every kind of, in like, we went with Tikvat Israel, is a conservative synagogue in Rockville. We went to several members' homes, like houses in the suburbs. We also went to high-rise apartment buildings like the Enclave in White Oak, lots of immigrant families in small apartments, and tested kitchens in every kind of setting. Routinely, like at least 1 in 3, if not 2 in 3 of those kitchens are reaching above 100 parts per billion of nitrogen oxide every time they're, in routine cooking conditions. And sometimes we're getting measurements of 200, 300, or 400 parts per billion of nitrogen oxide. And we don't, I put it on the table, but we don't want to leave them with nothing, because we want to change policy, but we also need to help people feel like they can have healthier homes even before they can replace their stoves or change things in a big way. So we have a dish towel, because a dish towel hangs in your kitchen. We have a dish towel that we leave the people after we test their kitchens that says some of the things you can do. Open windows, use a vent fan, improve ventilation, but also things you can do instead of using your gas-burning stove. Like you can buy an induction cooktop that's just like 1 burner's worth of electric induction, like 1 pot worth, that you can just plug in on the counter. And we used that for a number of months until we could replace our stove. There's air fryers, microwaves, toaster ovens, crock pots. There's lots of ways, there's lots of ways to prepare food without using your gas stove. If anyone's interested in signing up for volunteers to come test your kitchen, that's one of the QR codes there, and I'll also send it around. So that's one of the learnings we've been doing is about usually documenting the harms of gas burning ourselves. Okay. Going green. So there are a number of ways that we're supporting, and I want to meet with the Climate Action Group. I'd love to talk about what your dreams are for different things, and we have there's many, many ways to take action and shift the way we do things in this region. A couple I'll mention right now have to do with shifting at home to solar or clean energy, because there's a couple live opportunities right now. This flyer is about the Solar United Neighbors Purchasing Group, which does basically will walk you as a homeowner through the process of going solar on your own roof, either in DC or in Montgomery County, or Prince George's, or Frederick, and Northern Virginia. Yeah, it's listed all the places they serve. This is the Solar United Neighbors Purchasing Group. They are going to close this round July, I'm hoping for colder weather, July 23rd. And so this is a great way to, if you've always thought about going solar at home, but you want guidance, you don't know how to start, this is a great program that will walk you through the process, and you'll know you're doing it alongside many other good folks. On the bottom is also an opportunity. Not everyone can put up solar panels. You might be a renter. You might have been told that your roof isn't good or that there's a shade from a tree. So at the bottom of this is also community solar, which is an on-paper transaction. It's just something you can do on your energy bill to subscribe to community solar production from a large facility elsewhere. And that is available, I believe, in DC and Montgomery County as well. Or like anyone who's paying an energy bill to PEPCO is eligible to this. That's just one of many things to do to go green, and I'm happy to take questions about other things at the end. So, and speak out. So, we see all of this as in service of building a religious environmental movement in this region that can speak out for stronger policy. The fact is, we're not in a climate crisis because, not enough synagogues are using compostable tableware, even though that's very meaningful. But, or because not enough synagogues are recycling, or because your neighbor isn't recycling. We're in a climate crisis because industrial polluters have been allowed to, impose irrevocable damage on our one and only planet, without consequence, without being held accountable. That's why we are in this crisis. So, and I find that when I look for hope in this moment, I don't, like all the little things we can do are they're meaningful because they're spiritual practices, but they don't feel like they get at the scale of the problem. Like, if this is a global problem, it doesn't feel big enough to compost, you know, even synagogue-wide events to come, you know. So to me, like, the only way to feel hopeful is to be part of something much bigger that's gonna try to change laws and hold polluters accountable and ultimately, like, change things at a scale that starts to feel meaningful in the face of a global problem. So I want to make a strong, strong invitation that, that you think of climate action in this temple as including advocacy for stronger climate policy, particularly at the local level where we're doing really exciting things. You know, in DC, we just passed something called the Healthy Homes Act that's going to allow many low and moderate income folks to electrify their homes and make sure that it's not just the most privileged, most educated folks who are in the front of the line for all the Inflation Reduction Act incentives, but that we're going to work as a city to make sure that the folks on the front lines get those opportunities equitably. In Maryland, we just strengthened Maryland's energy efficiency program, the Empower program, in the last legislative session with the support of like over a dozen faith communities, faith groups, like large faith groups across the state. So now Empower will help people replace their gas-burning equipment when it ends its life. With they'll have incentives to replace gas-burning equipment with other electric equipment. We also passed an exciting law in Maryland called the Warmth Act that's going to let people. We're going to experiment with neighborhood-wide electrification, and it's called network geothermal. It's like neighborhood-wide geothermal where there's like pipes connecting all the houses and the local stores and whatnot, so that there's like a loop of liquid that, I don't know if anyone's used ground source geothermal, but the idea is that basically the ground is a constant temperature, so if you can get people onto a loop, heating and cooling all of those homes gets easier because you're not starting with really hot air on a day like this one and trying to air condition it down, or really cold air on a winter day and trying to warm it up, but you're starting with a constant temperature of air. But the idea of doing that, not at like one fancy house with a big yard, but like a geothermal that would use the public rights of way on a, you know, in a neighborhood with row houses, for example, is very exciting. And what was so cool about the Warmth Act, even though it's just a pilot program, is that Baltimore Gas and Electric's lobbyist showed up to testify next to me for that bill because they see that this might be the future for them. And the Baltimore Gas and Electric Workers Union rep also sat next to us in that and also testified for that bill. And that was a really, because they don't care what's in the pipes, they just want to lay pipe, right? They're happy to lay geothermal pipe. So, so anyway, the Warmth Act to me lays out a vision for how we could all be on the same team in the future. Finally, I want to just leave you with one opportunity to speak out imminently that I was asked to share by Melanie Aaron, Rabbi Aaron, right? Is that right? Yes. Oh, is she here? Oh, good. I'm glad I got to this. She's watching me, make sure I do this. So the Jewish Earth Alliance is a wonderful grassroots group around the country of Jewish communities that want to find ways to advocate for climate action in Congress at the federal level. And they're doing an online, an entirely virtual lobby day where folks from around the country are going to meet with their legislators on August 8th and talk to them about timely climate stuff. If that interests you, as I said, add your name here and I'll send all the links to everybody. And it's something you can do from home in the air conditioning. You don't have to schlep to Capitol Hill. To get ready for that, the Jewish Earth Alliance is having, at my table, how much we love Jamie Raskin came up several times, spontaneously. But Representative Jamie Raskin is going to speak on July 16th in the evening at a Zoom call for the Jewish Earth Alliance, which is in part a preparation for this lobby day. So that's an immediate opportunity to speak out on the federal level for strong climate policy. I forgot to mention these when I was talking about going green, but these are light switch reminders, and on the top they have the quote from the Torah that's used to talk about the tradition of not wasting. You know, the teaching is lo tashchit, thou shalt not destroy, and it originally applies just to fruit trees in a time of war, But as the rabbis expanded and discussed the teachings, they came to see it as a principle that we should not destroy anything that we don't need to. Like wanton destruction is not righteous. And by the Middle Ages, there was this expansion on this idea that righteous people don't waste even a mustard seed. It pains them to see anything beautiful and sacred be destroyed. And I do try to live that spirit as much as possible. It's very hard to actually live that out, to really grieve every needless destruction. We live in a world with so much needless destruction that was all around us, and feeling that we're in for a world of pain. But I do want to invite us to try to cultivate a little bit of that reverence that the Jewish tradition has for honoring and protecting the sacred, and trying to speak out whenever we see unnecessary destruction, and not be part of that unnecessary destruction if we don't have to be. So I'll end there and then take questions.
Thank you very much. The deal is, you indicate who's going to get to ask a question, and I give them the microphone.
Okay. I'll start over here.
I'm Andy Narva. I think making a difference requires probably efforts, all of us, to change what we do in our life. And two simple things are, one, how many people ever dry their clothes outside on a line?
Ooh.
Oh, wow, that's great. Because in lots of neighborhoods in DC, it's actually against the covenants to do that. And that's probably the single most wasteful use of power. The other thing, one of the most gratuitous contributors to atmospheric carbon dioxide is fire pits. And I imagine a lot of the people who come to hear you talk think it's great and then go home and light a fire pit and sit around and talk about it. But, it's... So that's something to think about. Those mean giving up something, the convenience of having a clothes dryer or using a clothes dryer, and fire pits. But they're small, but they actually could add up, and it's the kind of thing people are going to have to think about.
I will say we've been hanging up our clothes on a foldable laundry rack inside. We don't have enough of a yard to try clothes outside, but we're in a condo. But even just we've been able to mostly avoid. We sometimes cheat and use the dryer, but mostly we've been able to avoid it even without outdoor space. Yeah.
Hi, David Diskin. You mentioned a statistic that I found very interesting. You said 7 out of 10, I think, Americans now, I don't know what you said, believe in climate change or recognize it. That is the most helpful thing you've said today, because that, to me, implies there's a number of people on the right who must now start to believe in this. And I mean, to me, the biggest fear I have about this whole thing is what's going to happen in this election. It dwarfs everything.
Yes.
So could you comment on how those are related? Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for bringing that up, and I made a note to include it in my notes when I send something out. So there's the whole question of climate change opinion and climate change communications is a whole area of social science research now. And the two big leaders in that work are Andy Lazarowitz at Yale and Ed Maybach at George Mason here locally. And they have done a series of studies that they if you want to Google and learn about this, it's called the 6 Americas of Climate Change Opinion. So they've grouped Americans, I'm not going to be able to replicate, but there's certain beliefs you need to have about climate change to be, decide which of the 6 Americas you're in. And it's like, it's real, it's bad, it's us, but we can do something about it. I forget, there's like a, so what they do is they have circles. They divide all of America based on their climate opinion into circles, and the size of the circle shows you how many people, proportionally how many Americans are in those sections. So this is something I keep in my head when I'm coming into a group like this one where I don't know anybody yet, and I'm like, who am I talking to today? Well, so there's, in the United States in general, there's, on one end there's alarmed. So a lot of us are alarmed. Our hair is on fire about this, and we can't stop thinking about it. And then there's truly dismissive. It's also a very small circle on the other end. Folks who are, it's not a problem, I don't want to hear about it. I think it's a hoax, whatever. Everybody else is in the middle, concerned, curious, cautious, I forget exactly how they define those other. So it's worth understanding that we have been intentionally misled by corporate interests and by the way this has been covered in the media to think that this is a really controversial matter, but it's not. And increasingly Americans, I think it's also just we're seeing it in our own backyard. We're experiencing the consequences that help us understand what that the science is real. But take a look at those. But it's worth remembering that the truly dismissive people are not really the problem. There's not enough of them, and the biggest, when somebody stands up in the back of a room like this one and challenges me about the science, the worst thing I can do is let them waste my time, right? Because there's everybody else, and that's who's going to do the work together. One more thing. I also think people find this extremely upsetting. This is really upsetting to think about. If science is true, it's really unmooring, from things that we grew up believing that the places in this world that we love would be there for our kids to experience, or grandkids to experience, and that those places would be there. Or the idea that the seasons, we celebrate Tu B'Shvat in the Jewish tradition at the time that the almond trees blossomed in Israel. The idea that we are going to have first blossoming times all over the Northern Hemisphere that are unmoored from those ancient rhythms, it's deeply upsetting. And so I think the other thing that I've come to believe is that if we can honor the feelings that the grief and the disorientation that people feel when they encounter this seriously, I think some of that resistance will not be as strong. I think when people say, I don't want to hear this, I don't want to talk about it, I think it's partly because they haven't been invited to share and be present to the feelings. And that we have not, and I've seen too many scientific presentations about this stuff where a smiling person says one horrifying thing after another about the future that we face. And if you don't see that, if you don't see the anguish you're starting to feel reflected in the face of the person who's speaking, you start to feel like you want to leave the room. And I think that some of the resistance to climate science is that's what's going on, and so that the way in is to be more present to what it brings up for people. Okay, I'll stop talking. Yes. Sorry. You're good.
I have two questions. One about replacing gas with electricity. I have a problem with that. With the electricity comes from somewhere.
Yes, great question.
And so that's one of my questions.
Yes.
The other question is, what about nuclear?
Yeah.
Please state your name when you ask a question.
Karen Rosenbaum.
It's like I planted you. Those are the what about questions I always get. Okay. The first one is very reasonable, and I had it too. The idea is we make some of the electricity on the grid with those same combustion sources, right? Some of the energy on the grid is made by burning coal still. Some of it is made by burning oil and gas. So why are we saying electrify everything, which is the call right now? Electrify everything. Why was taking the stove that burns gas here and replacing it with an induction stove that burns that is drawing power that might have been partly made by burning gas somewhere else? How could that be a climate win now? So there's two answers. The first is, in general, all electric appliances, especially heat pumps, are so much more efficient than the thing they're replacing that it's a climate win even right now. So even with the current grid in Maryland, or the DC grid, replacing even with that grid that has some combustion sources on it, you still come out ahead for the climate. And there's a wonderful group called Rewiring America that actually addresses this mathematically on their site, and they show how a heat pump, specifically replacing a gas-burning furnace or whatever, comes out ahead on the climate in essentially everywhere in America already today. So that's the first answer. The second answer is, the grid is getting cleaner every single day, right? Like everybody, like we have 100, I didn't mention this, I forgot. We have over 100 congregations on our solar congregations map, including this one, right? So we have congregations going solar every day in this region. Every time we put more solar on the grid, the math gets better, right? So every time that they elect, and we have all these laws in Maryland pushing us towards a cleaner and greener grid. So as the math for climate gets better and better as the grid gets cleaner, there's no way to make the gas cleaner, but the grid keeps getting cleaner. So the math is good now and gets better. And the third reason I would give is about these indoor air pollution concerns, right? Burning gas indoors is a real health issue. And it's been really inspiring to me to see the way social justice organizations like Washington Interfaith Network, Action in Montgomery, that have historically just fought for healthier housing, are understanding that they're working alongside us because we're worried about climate and they're worried about their folks having healthy homes. And we're all on the same side of this one because of the incredible health harms of gas. Nuclear is not terribly relevant to the work we do, but it is sort of the American environmental consensus that it's not, that putting new nuclear on the grid is not a compelling climate solution, both because of dangers and a lot. But my understanding is one of the biggest concerns is just the time. Like it takes like 10 years from start to finish to put new nuclear on the grid. Like we don't have 10 years. We just need to convert very rapidly. So, but I think I always get this question, but it's not, there's not active, like we try to raise a faith voice in support of the big things that the environmental movement in this region is pushing for, and like it's not even on the table right now. Oh, I'm sorry, you've had your hand up longer. Okay, why don't we go here and then here, sorry.
Jean Steckler. I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about the case study of the congregation in Kensington, Maryland, that won a national award, and what they've done with their solar panels and how it's supporting not only the congregation but the community.
Congregations going solar is one of our favorite things. On our website, it's ipldmv.org/solar. You can find a map, an interactive map of every congregation we know about in this region that has gone solar. It's well over 100 now. They do it in different ways, and we could talk more about some of the ways forward. I will say it's part of why we've stayed with this, even though the projects sometimes are small or harder to finance because they're not, they're not a huge warehouse with room for hundreds of kilowatts, is because our buildings are beacons in our communities, and they really do show people how we could live differently. Right, even closer to home, like there's so many, you asked about Kensington, I was like, oh my gosh, there's so many solar congregations right here. St. Albans Parish, on the grounds of the National Cathedral, is solar. The National Cathedral itself has some solar on some of the buildings now. Washington Hebrew has solar. So just in this neighborhood, I can think of quite a few solar congregations. At St. Albans, which did this 15 years ago now, one of the first in the region, the rector at the time said, these are our newest stained glass windows, because they tell our story to the world the way our stained glass windows do. And I love that idea that when congregations take these steps, even if they are mostly symbolic, they do some real good, and they also just show us how we can live better. Most congregations that are going solar, even now, are doing power purchase agreement financing, which means a third party is coming and putting the panels on the roof at no expense to the congregation, owns them, and then is selling the congregation the power generated by those panels for less than what they were paying per kilowatt hour before. In DC, that's almost always possible because the SREC, the incentives are so good, really good. In Maryland, the SRECs just got more valuable. They were just improved again. So basically, we can pursue fully financed solar for most nonprofit organizations that have good roofs in this region right now. and we'd love to help you with that. And our website, below the map, there's like a long explanation of all the reasons and how it works so that you can feel like you're going into the process empowered. The specific question you asked about was community solar. So I don't know if when I mentioned that if you can't put up panels on your own roof, you can subscribe to community solar. So this is a program that's available in DC and in Maryland, where a large array in one location can be subscribed to by people who are elsewhere in the same grid. And what you're asking about is a particular church, Warner Memorial Presbyterian, that was able to be a community solar site. In other words, they are the project from which people around them are subscribing, which is very cool. And there are quite a few nonprofits. We're also talking with a big, like a black mega church in Prince George's County about becoming a community solar site, and they love the idea of being able to provide solar energy to their neighbors and to some of the housing that they run in that region. In general, to be a site for community solar, you have to be really optimal, because the idea is putting solar in a really good place and then letting people who can't access solar otherwise subscribe to it. The third, these days, the Inflation Reduction Act, you might have heard about this. The Inflation Reduction Act, for the first time, made the federal tax credit available to nonprofits, even though they don't pay taxes. My dad's a federal tax lawyer. He's like, I don't know how this is the first time anyone has ever asked us to give tax rebates to a non-taxpayer. We're not sure how to handle this, but they're figuring it out. So right now, the federal solar tax credit is available to nonprofits as what they call direct pay, as the expression. So it means that nonprofits could, instead of having a third party come and finance it for you and take all the benefits, you could put together 70% of the expense and then get the 30% back yourself from the federal government. But I think the jury is still out about whether congregations are going to choose that or going to still go with the fully financed thing that's less trouble, and they don't have to put 70% of the money down.
Joelle, Jerry has somebody in the Zoom audience.
I actually have a comment from Rabbi Aaron.
Okay.
So Melanie says, could somebody, David, could somebody turn the sound off on that other computer? Roberta, just the sound up on the keyboard. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Okay, Melanie says, when we've spoken with rabbis, they seem to be more open to protecting God's creation. In other words, using those words, Republicans, not rabbis. Oh. Okay, thank you, Melanie. When we've spoken with Republicans, they seem more open to protecting God's creation. Environment and climate seem to be words to be avoided. And so that's something to keep in mind. And one more thing, Mimi's asking, is there, what kind of costs are involved in just private people converting to solar?
Sure. I love the first comment, and I just wanted to say that this aligns with the way we do our work, that Dr. Catherine Hayhoe is one of the absolute leaders on communicating about climate to folks, and she's married to an evangelical pastor, so she's a climate scientist and also has real expertise about how to talk to different kinds of Americans. She says, you can never ask someone to become someone else. You can only ask someone to become more fully who they are. And that's what we're doing at IPL. I'm only here asking, what would a Reformed temple that's really living out the heart of its mission be doing about this issue? That's all I can ask you, right? And the thing that Catherine Hayhoe says is, all of us already are who we need to be to respond to this issue. In other words, all of us love people and places that will be harmed if we don't do anything about the climate. But that when you talk to someone else, you can't assume that the things that make the reasons you care about climate change are the reasons they care about climate change. Instead, you have to listen first to hear what they care about, what they love, what their values are, and then honor that by speaking to what the climate crisis would mean for them. And it also sometimes means using different words than the ones you use. costs, I would say don't, so the Solar United Neighbors program is about, discounted group purchasing for solar panels. So, they would give you, all you're agreeing to if you sign up is just some indication that they'll give you a proposal, basically, and then you can still decide what to do about it. So, everyone should just, if you're curious, just try. That after they give you a price, they will tell you the federal tax credit, any local tax credit, how much you can earn back by selling the solar credits that will be generated by that system. So, that first price is much higher than the actual, and then it's going to save, it's going to generate energy. For a whole year, even in that first year, you're going to save on your energy bill from having panels on your roof. So, it's often, I've seen an over $10,000 price tag coming down way, to a few $1,000s, once you add all those things together, and especially in DC and Maryland. But I would encourage somebody to just sign up and see what it would mean for you. You also could size your system differently. They might say you can have room for 6 kilowatts, and you say, well, I can only afford 3 right now, and they'll put up a project, something the right size. Finally, folks who are income qualified in DC are eligible for Solar for All, which is free solar panels if you're under a certain income. So, Solar United Neighbors, this program is hooked up with them. So if you sign up and you're eligible for Solar for All, they will send you over to that program and you'll get free solar panels. So go for it. I don't know how much time I have. I'm happy to keep calling on people. All right, how about these two over here, because you guys both have been.
I'm Jeffrey Barron, and if any of you don't know me, I lead our climate action group here at the synagogue. We meet once a month, and we are a space, Joelle was talking earlier about, it's good to have a place where you can talk about how it feels and what you're concerned about, and we make a space for that every month. And we're also, because the election this year is so important to the climate, we're actually having a postcard writing party a week from tomorrow afternoon, right here in this room, where we'll be writing postcards to voters in Georgia to encourage them to vote in November.
Awesome.
Did you want to say something?
Oh.
One more who hasn't asked a question? I have one. You said you've been at this for 15 years.
Yes.
What happened 15 years ago that set you on this path?
Oh, that's a great question. So I grew up in Baltimore in a multi-generational Jewish family in Baltimore, and we were at a big conservative synagogue, and I was always, I just was a very serious kid, and I always took everything we were taught very seriously, and I thought, these religious ideas are radical. Like, every person is made in the divine image. Like, we don't live that like that. That's amazing. If we really took this stuff seriously, it would change everything. And I basically have just been at it ever since. I mean, I went off to college and came back and was very interested in this question of what would it look like to really live out our values? Like, what would that look like for me? What would that look like for my community? I helped start something called Tikkun Leil Shabbat for many years, which was a full, soulful Shabbat service, followed by a teaching about a social justice issue, which was called a Devar Tikkun. We made that word up, for teaching a word of repair from a local organization. So I experimented quite a bit in my young adulthood with it, putting social justice at the center of our Jewish communities and seeing what that would look like and what that would feel like. And I was, about 15 years ago, I was working at Green America, which used to be called Co-op America, a green purchasing and investing organization. And about that time, the Inconvenient Truth movie came out, which focused a lot of people on climate for the first time. What became 350.org, but was at the time called Step It Up, started to have actions. The first time I was really seeing climate advocacy in person, grassroots. And and I continue to be fascinated by this question of like, what would it mean to challenge our religious communities to live out our traditions authentically in this time? And I've always been just like interested in religion, and I love going to other congregations and venturing by experiencing different faith traditions. So, so when the Interfaith Power Light program needed a new director, and at the time it was literally one staff person, and I replaced that one staff person, but I just was captivated by this idea that we could spend this time inviting ourselves and each other to live out our values more fully and to make our traditions and commitments real in this time. And I haven't gotten tired of it. I mean, a different question is, why am I still doing it 15 years later? And the answer is because these are the best people. I mean, the people who get together every week to think about how to do good and be righteous, and like, this is the land of human goodness I get to hang out in, and if I have to be a climate activist, which can be very dispiriting, like, these are the people I want to be doing it with. So I'll leave it there.